very much. A good evening to you all from Kampala, Uganda. I'm delighted to be a part of this session and to contribute in whatever way I can to getting stronger cybersecurity skills and outcomes for the African continent and the world at large. I'm passionate about cyber, I'm passionate about people, and I think this is one of the great things we can do together as a community to ensure that we get to the next level for business, for individuals, for our economies, and to make the world a better place. And so thank you so much for your invitation.
Thank you.
And I look forward to a great session. So today I'll be talking about zero trust. I think everybody has heard about zero trust in one way or another. And I'll try to make a case for zero trust getting implemented in organizations that we serve, that we look after, that we belong to, and how we can get started and get moving on zero trust initiatives. So the whole concept of zero trust is really boiling down to the second word, trust. Human beings and the interactions that they have are guided by trust. Trust is one of those fundamental elements of human existence because we take decisions and associate value and certain key expectations through relationships. There is the underpinning element of trust that is cultivated between different parties and different beneficiaries or providers within any human relationship or any human interaction. And so human beings thrive on trust. When there's trust, things can be done. The impossible can be achieved. You can go beyond one individual and deliver things at the scale of hundreds of millions and even billions of people because trust is in existence. And so when you talk about trust, the dictionary definitions can give you many words or many definitions or descriptions, but you can look at that word cloud and think about a few of those words and see how they relate to trust. You see ability, reliable, hope, and there's also someone or something. So associating a certain quality with a person, an individual, a place, an organization, that's what trust is all about. Gaining confidence, having confidence, being reliable, and setting an expectation that you would like to be honored or delivered at the end of the day. That's really what trust is about. So today we are into cybersecurity and we're looking at the cyberspace, the digital world, and how that benefits or how that relies on trust to make it a place where people are comfortable to make money, people are comfortable to work, people are comfortable to study, people are comfortable to be entertained, people are comfortable to cultivate social relationships that go beyond what we have in the physical. Now, right there is Mikhail Gorbachev, passed away a few weeks ago. He was the last president of the Soviet Union. And smiling next to him is, looking down, is President Ronald Reagan, who was the president of the USA in the late 80s, at a time when two world powers, the Soviet Union and the USA, were coming to the close of the so-called Cold War. And in this interaction, a series of things happened and it led to the end of the Cold War. And these two gentlemen had a very huge part to play. And one of the things that you take away from their interaction was the idea that Mr. Gorbachev taught Reagan a certain Russian saying, which really included the idea that you should trust, but always verify. And for those of us who love history and military science, we can look back upon some of these moments and associate them with what we're trying to do here today. Trust between some of the most competitive or the fiercest enemies of the time was cultivated because they always had an element of being able, or being required to verify whatever was being said by either party, whatever was being signed or assented to in a treaty. And so the idea of trust and verification coming out of the interaction of Mr. Gorbachev and Mr. Reagan is an interesting historical anecdote that we can look back on as we try to understand zero trust in the modern age. So the zero trust model as a concept for cybersecurity was coined by a Forrester research analyst called John Kinderberg in 2010, and is now a thought leader around modern zero trust initiatives and architectures. And the underlying concept is never trust, always verify. So unlike Gorbachev's trust but verify, we now have to face the reality that we can never really trust any entity or any assertion or any assumption until we have verified that it fits the criteria that we expect. And so the assumption is that risk will always be there in any interaction, in any part of the network, whether inside or outside. And so we have to start to think differently about the way we design, build, operate, and secure the networks that we rely on to do business and to achieve other objectives in the cyberspace. This is a kind of timeline for zero trust, stemming from 1994, where you had a thesis by a gentleman called Stephen Paul Marsh, who was doing a research on computer security and information security. Somewhere down the line, the Jericho Forum for Information Security starts to talk about deperimeterization. And then down the line, you have Google developing its Beyond concept in 2009. And that's around the time when our zero trust idea comes to life, or is popularized by Forrester Research, courtesy of John Kinderberg. And in 2018, the US government had a federal standard coming up through their NIST SP 800-207, which was created as a mandate for all federal government organizations to implement and deliver cybersecurity on the basis of zero trust. So you have ideas turning into requirements that are government and regulatory in nature. And that is really how we find ourselves working with zero trust as a reality for cybersecurity in 2022 and beyond. So why does it matter? Why do we spend time on zero trust, and why is zero trust something that we should pay attention to? Because there's so many things to think about. If you want to think about the metaverse, cryptocurrency, or whatever floats your boat, there's so many technologies and trends. But let's talk about zero trust a bit more. So coming back to the human factors, we have trust as an enabling quality of relationships. The same thinking about others and security leads us to the thinking about boundaries and perimeters. Human beings have always thought about themselves as in need of protection, and they have built up the idea of perimeters first in the mind and then in real life, in the physical world, to secure themselves and their property and those that matter to them. And so perimeters and boundaries form a fundamental part of human existence and human relationships. And as we look at risks and threats evolving, boundaries and perimeters become more and more important. So here we have our friends in China doing the Great Wall of China in a couple of dynasties and centuries before what we have today. And it was a way of keeping out the enemies and keeping in some important things or ideas or technologies or goods. And so that is one idea that took root and became really powerful in China. In the middle here, we have an example of a kraal, a homestead of an African man. This is somewhere from Eastern Africa, among my people here in Uganda and Kenya. And there's a concept of a boundary all around, composed of hedges, and it's keeping in cattle, it's keeping in huts, granaries, wives, and children in a well-controlled and well-administered entity where you have a main gate and a back gate. And that's really the East African thinking about boundaries. And then you have our friends in the Western world who went on to build castles upon castles. And that is also representative of physical security, but it's an implementation or an expression of the concept of boundaries and perimeters. So here's one exciting one. I think we've all heard of the horse on wheels with men inside as one of those stories that cannot leave you the same, the so-called Trojan Horse, as enemies of a city tried to get in and could not get in with success, and so left a gift at the walls and withdrew, only for the defenders to drag the horse in and store it inside the city walls. And alas, attackers were able to emerge from the horse and take over control of the city gates. So these stories illustrate how human beings have built up boundaries and have tried to use those boundaries to their benefit, both as defenders and as attackers. And the whole idea is that as we move along, tactics have changed. And today we see that breaches, just like in the Trojan Horse era or story, do not just come from the outside of the perimeter, but are actually able to come from the inside. So the so-called insider threat. So bringing that back to today's cybersecurity reality, we have, this is Cisco research, which shows that 81% of breaches that were recorded in 2020 by Cisco Systems and their threat research agency, 81% of those breaches targeted identity. 54% of web applications that were vulnerable actually had a real public exploit available and ready to be deployed or weaponized by an attacker or a script kiddie or a researcher. And then on the other hand, you find that 300% increase was registered in terms of attacks that targeted devices, and that's IoT. And IoT does not mean some fancy sensors or some fancy meter reader. IoT is IP phones, CCTV cameras, barcode scanners, anything that's on the network that does not exactly have a graphical user interface that you use like your laptop or your computer, but still plays a key role. So it might be a sensor, but it might as well be a telephone, might be a barcode scanner or a CCTV camera. And so the idea that these devices can be attacked and are being attacked is a reality that is upon us. And so that just gives you a picture of how threats are moving away from servers and money in the bank to targeting credentials, applications, and identity. And as we look more at the evolving landscape, we find that arising from COVID-19 and any other things that you might want to talk about, a lot of organizations have increased their cloud footprint. They have increased their remote work capability. And we're seeing growth in hybrid infrastructure, personal devices, BYOD, employee mobility, and things like that. And so there's a sense that the old perimeter where you had a data center and a perimeter network secured by firewalls and intrusion prevention systems and all sorts of fancy stuff has kind of collapsed because data and users have left the organization. So whereas you have a data center and a secure facility that you have invested in, there's a lot of data and transactions and functionality that has left the building. And so the perimeter on its own does not exist or does not serve much. Your users, the data is in the cloud, your users are working from home, your clients are on mobile and on apps. You have moved workloads to the cloud, serverless, or whatever other architecture that you choose. The supply chain and third-party vendors who support your infrastructure and support your ecosystem are off-premise in the cloud. And then we now have the perimeter shifting. So we no longer have the inside and the outside, where you have the good guys in and the bad guys out. We now have good guys and bad guys everywhere all the time, inside and outside. And what does that look like for the business? We have an increased attack surface. We have gaps in visibility. Businesses are asking themselves, how do we know that users are who they say they are? The identity and access management challenge. Are devices secure and up to date? I mean, that's your patching and vulnerability management processes. What's on the network? How does it connect? This is network access control and any other technologies that you might have. What's in the cloud and who has access to it? That's your cloud. How can we view and secure all connections, encryption, authentication? What exists in the cloud and how does it connect? What workloads do you have? Do you have orphaned workloads? Do you have things that you know about or you don't know about? Are you suffering from shadow IT? Are your vendors exposing you to third-party supply chain risk? So you have all those things, but the idea is that there's increased visibility. There's a huge gap in your visibility, sorry. There's a huge increase in your attack surface. All your data, all your transactions, all your systems are all over the place. It's classical distributed computing. So this really means that any organization today is suffering from what you might call excessive trust because of the way the network, the infrastructure, the apps, the data has been designed and operated, and it has grown into something that is unrecognizable. So let's move on and try to capture the essence of zero trust and what it might mean to enterprises and individuals that need to secure and protect themselves. So zero trust essentially says, let's move away from certain assumptions, especially those about implicit trust. So thinking that you have the good guys inside your network and the bad guys outside, and if you achieve a strong perimeter network with firewalls and etc., you're going to be safe. That's an assumption that does not work. Trusting people because they're employees or there's a CEO, somebody sitting in the CEO's office, or somebody is using the CEO's laptop, and so you trust them 100%. That's going to be a huge problem. Trusting people because they are your employees or they've been serving for many years, or they are the head of security or the head of IT. All those trust assumptions that we have excessively granted to different people in the enterprise must change and must be re-examined. And so we need to move towards stronger authentication beyond just username and a password, things like multi-factor authentication, biometrics, whatever you call it. Looking at context, understanding what's happening in a transaction on the network or on a system. How do we, instead of just saying yes or no because you have the right username and password, can we look at other factors like the geographical location that you're logging in from, the time, the pattern, do you fit the amount that you are transacting, where you are transacting it from, how many other transactions have you done that particular day? Do you normally do such transactions? across the month. So being able to build additional context by understanding other factors or other characteristics of transactions gives you a richer picture to work with and a richer decision-making criteria that is likely to give you better outcomes. So speaking to this compared to traditional setup compared to a zero trust objective, you have a traditional setup where you are using network-based security and you are largely assigning static definitions. If somebody is on a corporate network, they are good guys. And if somebody is inside the building and they're working on a company computer, they are doing great. That is an assumption which must be challenged. And in zero trust, we speak to building additional context around transactions, around operations, being able to protect data, machines, and users by understanding as much information we have about them and being able to make decisions based on much more stronger and relevant criteria than just having a yes and no approach, or in your firewall you have permit and deny rules which have no concept of time, who, where, what, how much, and etc. So having richer context, really, for me, that's the key message about zero trust, being able to derive as much context about whatever transaction you're making, you're examining, and using that enriched context to give you a better or a more accurate decision. That's what zero trust is going to be about. All right, so we protect data, not only looking out for attacks. We assume that all the environments are hostile and breached. So whether you are in the network, in the cloud, in your home, or in another country, there's going to be the same criteria, and the assumption is going to be that you are connecting from an insecure network, and there must be a set of criteria to establish that you are actually safe before you are granted access. Encrypted transactions and flows, and at the end of the day, everything is logged forensically. And I think this is going to be very important for all of us, being able to achieve forensic quality logging, so that when you have logs, you do not have to ask any other question about them, because they provide as much information as there is, and they give you as much rich value as you can have from any information about a transaction or an activity on the network. So forensic quality logging, ladies and gentlemen, that is going to be a target or a requirement of zero trust that you must be able to build into your architecture, your operations, and whatever other initiatives that you have. And so the whole idea is that trust is going to be temporary. If you authenticated me in the morning, you must be able to authenticate me in the afternoon if I'm doing something different, or if I'm continuing with the same activity, because things change, controls decay, people go bad, people get new ideas, and something that was valid yesterday might not necessarily be valid today. The speed at which threats evolve simply means that trust has got to be a temporary thing. You cannot grant it once and for all on the day you join the company, and you have trust until the day you retire. So from cradle to maybe grave, I think that's not going to be able to help us anymore. All right. So here are some foundational rules for zero trust. There's 7 of them, and we can look at them individually, but I'll just take them as a list so that we do not get bogged down. So the idea here is that all data resources and computing services are considered as resources. Communication must be secured regardless of your location, so encryption is a must. Access to each enterprise resource is granted on a per session basis. Access is determined by dynamic policy. Number 5, you monitor and measure integrity and security policy posture of all owned and associated assets. All resource authentication and authorization is dynamic and strictly enforced before access is allowed. And the enterprise collects as much information as possible about the current state of assets, network infrastructure, and communication, and uses that to improve its security posture. So that's coming out of the NIST publication SP 800-207, which speaks to zero trust. And it simply reinforces some of the things that we've been talking about. So moving on to what a zero trust architecture looks like. Please don't get bored by this, but it's important for us to understand what exactly we are talking about and how it happens. So the idea is that you have decision-making. Zero trust is about decision-making. Zero trust is how do you define what is permissible and what is not permissible. How do you grant access reliably, accurately, in a timely way that gives you positive security outcomes that address the risk that you have. So you have, say, three entities. You have somebody, a person, a user trying to access a system or running on a system. So this might be your maybe Windows 11 PC, and it's an employee X on the PC. And so they want to access, let's say, this is our database. So you have a database, the enterprise resource, and you are requesting for access. So in between the end user or the subject and the resource or the asset they want to access, you got to have a control, a policy enforcement point, a firewall, a proxy, a server, an access server, something that is standing in the way and granting access, between the user who needs the resource and the resource that is protected and is got to be secured. And so as this access is requested, we have, say, access is requested, step number 1. Step number 2, the policy enforcement point will consult a certain decision point, the policy engine and policy administrator, which will say, it will give a yes or no verdict, and then access will be granted or denied to the resource. So you do have a policy enforcement point, in this case, standing between a user and an enterprise resource. So this might be your firewall, this might be your network access control system, this might be your web application firewall, if I'm to use that kind of language. Whatever technology, whatever kind of network element you have providing that service, it's got to stand between users and resources and be able to consult an advanced decision-making engine, which could be something like Active Directory, could be LDAP, could be anything that you're using to have a centralized store of your users and be able to work with them to provide access reliably and consistently every time you have a request that touches on a protected enterprise resource. So coming back to, just to clean up the slide, this information comes out of the decision-making at this point. You have a policy that you have established, and that policy speaks to inputs, like you have a configuration management system, you have industry requirements, maybe from your regulator, from the national security agencies, and whatever other inputs that you have. You have real-time threat intelligence. that allows you to understand what's going on in the network, patches, vulnerabilities, threat, indicators of compromise, etc. Then you have logs that give you ability to understand what's been going on. So all that is used as context in decision making to enrich the kind of decision that you're making, basing on a policy that is already well defined. On the other hand, you also have things like the data access policy, you have encryption, you have identity and access management, and the security information and event management system that gives you enriched data about the decision that you're going to make. The yes or no decision is going to come out of a lot of data or a lot of inputs that help you to arrive at a very accurate yes or no decision for the access that's going to be granted right there. All right. So zero trust is about decision making, and you're going to have a trust algorithm that makes those decisions, the yes or no decision, and it's got to be able to receive access requests, look at the history, check the access database. Is it a corporate-owned database, corporate-owned equipment? Is it a staff or personal device? What's the antivirus endpoint management? Is it encrypted? Has it been away for years? What's the patch level, etc.? You have policy requirements that come from your security policy that's well defined. And then you have external threat intelligence that gives you a sense of what's going on. Is this a new attack? Is it an attack on our network that's coming in as blending itself as legitimate data? So you've got to always have a sense of what's your trust algorithm and how strong is it to give you the right level of risk management that you need. All right, so this diagram simply tries to put that in one place. So you have your user inventory, device inventory, your application inventory, your assets, where they are, who is the authorized user on the network, what are your servers and your laptops and your iPads, what are your cloud instances, etc. That information has got to be well known and well defined. Your endpoints have to be well accounted for. And then you also have external enforcement like of policy and authentication. So you might have your cloud instances like 365 or any other. You might have AWS running, and you want to also connect that to your policy engine so that your zero trust is able to work across on-premise, endpoint, cloud, legacy apps, etc. You have a policy that is consistent, defined in one place, and able to give you results across the entire landscape. All right, so let me speak to getting started as we start to end the presentation. I think it's important to understand, what are we protecting? What is the crown jewels in the organization? What is important? Why are we doing all the security? Because we cannot have security for the sake of security. It's going to be focused on certain assets. So what are your assets? Is it data? Is it user credentials? Is it transactions? What is it? Is it your infrastructure? Because if you're a telecom company, for example, or you're an ISP, your infrastructure is what, or a cloud service provider, your infrastructure is what you use to make money. But you also have a duty to protect user data. You have a duty to protect credentials. You have a duty to protect privacy. So what is it that we are protecting? Where? Who is in charge? Who looks after them? And what's the thinking around security? Because you have the static, old school thinking of inside good, outside bad. Then you now have to modernize that and think of the no perimeter, the perimeter which is no longer existent. You know, think of the various connected entities, cloud, endpoint, on-premises, third-party vendor, government, regulator, geopolitical adversaries, industrial espionage. How do you put that all together? Does your thinking benefit from reality, or is it static and is not allowing you to have a full picture of what risks can impact and affect your crown jewels that you have identified? And now some organizations don't even have an idea of where their crown jewels are. They know they are doing security, but they cannot tell you for sure where all their laptops are, all their users are, all their cloud instances are. So you have varying levels of maturity around information security because some foundational things have not yet been done. So being able to look at what your assets are and where they are and how you start to look after them, that's really going to be important. If there's something you got to remember from this, just remember, if you cannot manage it, if you do not know it, you cannot manage it. If you cannot measure it, you cannot manage it. So if you have assets that you don't know about, then you need to find maybe another job or find something else to do. Assets must be cataloged in an inventory which is up to date. Next step, governance. Everything rises and falls on leadership. Zero trust has got to come from the top. Thinking has got to be different from the top. The leaders, the people who allocate resources, the people who take decisions have got to think about threats and risks differently. And so you have to start with an initiative to educate, to get people on board and allow them to understand that zero trust is going to be able to deliver better business outcomes and allow the organization to achieve its mission. So being able to align the things that might hurt the organization, the threats, the risk, with what strategy the organization is pursuing, that's going to be able to allow you to influence people in leadership positions and allow them to take the right decisions and get behind your zero trust initiative. The second capability you need to have is to look at policy automation and orchestration. You cannot or you should not wash your clothes if you have a washing machine. Don't wash your clothes yourself if you have a washing machine. So being able to automate security using analytics and machine learning and AI or any other tools, be it Python or whatever you want to use, but being able to automate security so that security is not done by hand, logs are not reviewed by a person going through clicking and scrolling, but being able to consolidate all these thousands and millions of event data and visualize it and take decisions on it in an automated, scalable, secure way allows you to have better security outcomes. So that's really automation and orchestration, pushing out policy and working to filter, receive, analyze, and take decisions, that feedback using software tools and algorithms. Then looking at the security controls that we have, maturing them, coming out of static, firewall-based, rule-based, to have more context, to understand what's really going on from a business perspective and have better outcomes. So look at the guys who do fraud and anti-money laundering. The way they structure their controls and their approach to detecting risk is going to have to benefit from context. And so if firewall guys and intrusion prevention system guys can move away from the static thinking of permit, deny, and start to think like the guys who do fraud and anti-money laundering, to have more context in the decisions that the control points make, that's going to have a better outcome that can lead you to better ability to embrace zero trust. And then obviously the human factor. There's going to be a huge part for the human element to play. Being able to get the right people and also influencing people to behave correctly, have an understanding of what ethics means and what ethics contributes to the achievement of objectives, that's going to be very important. So having a plan that addresses the right talent and being able to sustain that talent, but also influencing the other human factors that come along with implementing cybersecurity, that's going to be a key objective that you have to deliver. All right, so how do you start? Some people will start in a big bang, but it's recommended that you look for certain specific areas or aspects or components of cybersecurity that you can start with. So you might want to focus on users and devices, enriching the kind of authentication that you have, mechanisms and policies, so that that process of information security is well improved using zero trust principles, you might want to then move to securing your apps and data by looking at data classification, DLP initiatives, addressing microservices and APIs, and implementing DevSecOps criteria that can allow you to apply zero trust in the area of securing apps and data. And then there's the favorite one for networks and firewalls. And I think here there's no shortage of vendors and solutions out there. But the idea is that being able to go into your network and open it up from a thinking point of view and saying, now that we have no perimeters, how do we secure each asset where it stands? And how do we scale that up to hundreds and thousands and maybe even millions of entities on the network so that the security policy works all the time, everywhere, on every device, in every operating system, or in every scenario. So that's really a way you can address it, going by pillars or by aspects of cybersecurity, users, apps, networks. But it's got to be gradual. It's got to give you an opportunity to give people results that are tangible and to manage the change in a way that allows you to succeed at the end of the day. So in conclusion, a few things to take away. The perimeter no longer exists, as we've stressed. Identity and credentials are the new perimeter. That's where the fight or the struggle is going to be. That's where the risk is. And that's where you've got to secure. And that's how zero trust supports the current risk environment. It's important to assume that networks are insecure. So do not imagine that you are secure if your computer has ever connected to the internet. Think about it as an insecure computer. Insiders come with the greatest risk. Some are targets and others are threats themselves. And so it's important to think about them. Zero trust allows you to sort out or to address this insider risk issue. And also starting your zero trust initiative with the thinking. And for me, that's really going to be the most important part. Zero trust is not a solution, it's not a product, it's not a firewall you want to buy somewhere. There's so many people selling zero trust solutions. But unless the organization is able to develop the concept internally, you're just going to be spending money on something called zero trust, and it's marketed by somebody who thinks it's good at zero trust. But the outcomes are not going to be embedded and sustainable unless we think about how we got here and how do we get out of this challenge of excessive trust that we must, whittle down and close in on to ensure that whatever we do now gives us security outcomes because we have adopted a zero trust thinking first. So the thinking before any technology, before any software, before any expert or any, outsourcing, you've got to have clear thinking about zero trust outcomes for your organization and a strategy that you want to use to achieve those outcomes. And then you can start to go to the market to shop for technology that you need and partners that you need to implement that. Lastly, automate and orchestrate your security policy. It is impossible to do logs and event management by hand. So scale up, use data science, analytics, machine learning, or whatever other technology you want to use to be able to analyze and process and take decisions basing on your security parameters in your organization. So this is it. Verify, then trust. That's really it. So I think I'm happy to end here and take on questions. At the end of these slides, there's some resources you can refer to, the Microsoft assessment, and then there's Google's example of their zero trust implementation called Beyond COP. Thank you very much.